Morning light crept through thin curtains, quiet and uninvited. The old clock on the shelf ticked faintly, marking time for no one in particular. In the stillness, Eleanor lay awake, her hands folded loosely over the blanket. She didn't rush to rise anymore. There was no reason to hurry when the day would be exactly like the last. The house was too quiet now, a quiet that pressed in, heavy and familiar. Every sound seemed loud against it. The creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind through the chimney, the soft thud of her cane against the wooden floor. Once, laughter had filled these rooms, her husband's low chuckle, her son's quick jokes, the sound of dishes clattering during Sunday dinners. Now there was only the echo of what had been. She shuffled to the kitchen, her slippers brushing the floor. The air smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. She poured water into the kettle out of habit, though she no longer drank more than a sip or two. The sound of the kettle filling was a small comfort, something alive in the silence. When she sat at the table, her eyes drifted to the other chair. It stood empty, the cushion still indented from years of use. For a long while she just stared at it. Then she whispered softly, almost to herself, "Good morning, love." Her voice cracked on the last word. The house didn't answer, but somewhere in the hush that followed, it felt like someone was listening. The photographs lined the mantel like small frozen pieces of her heart. Eleanor dusted them one by one every morning, though her hands trembled and the motion hurt her wrists. It wasn't really about the dust. It was about keeping them seen, keeping them close. There was her husband, smiling the way only he could, gentle, sure, full of quiet strength. Next to him, their son on his graduation day, eyes bright, unaware that life would take him far away and far too soon. And then the wedding photo, two young faces, filled with a faith that seemed unshakable then. Eleanor touched the edge of that frame. The glass was cold under her fingertips. Her reflection wavered in it, old now, alone, but still the same woman beneath the years and the grief. "I kept everything just how you left it," she whispered. Her words barely stirred the still air. For a moment, she imagined them answering back, her husband's deep voice, her son's familiar laugh. But there was only the ticking clock, counting another moment she couldn't get back. She looked at the faces again, faces that seemed to watch her with patience rather than absence. And though she couldn't explain why, she said softly, "I hope you can see me too." Outside, a beam of sunlight slid across the wall and lingered over the photographs, as though heaven had turned its face toward her for just a moment. On the small table by the door, a letter sat. It had been there for weeks, perhaps months. The envelope was simple, nothing marked on the front, just the faded handwriting of someone Eleanor had once known. She had meant to open it, but something stopped her every time. The truth was, she didn't want to know. She didn't want to know about distant relatives moving away, or distant friends remembering her birthday with charity. The world outside her door had moved on, and Eleanor had stayed behind, surrounded by the echoes of what used to be. Every time she passed the table, she looked at the letter, wondering if it would be the one that changed everything. But the truth, she realized, was that it had already been sealed. Once the world had slipped away, nothing seemed important enough to open the doors again. But today, she stopped. Her hand reached out toward it, her fingers brushing the worn paper. For a moment, her heart raced. And then she pulled it back. Instead of opening the letter, she simply sat down at the table, staring at it for a long time. "I guess I'm not ready," she whispered. And for the first time in a long while, she understood. Not every unopened thing needed to be unsealed to heal. The small radio on the kitchen counter had been her last companion. It used to fill the silence, hymns in the morning, weather reports at noon, the soft hum of voices that made her feel less alone. Then one day, without warning, it simply went quiet. Eleanor tried turning the knobs, adjusting the antenna, even giving it a small tap like her husband used to do. But the silence held. No static, no music, just the hum of emptiness that seemed to settle deeper into the house. For a few days, she left it plugged in, hoping it would somehow come back to life. Each time she passed it, she caught herself waiting, listening for the first note of a familiar song. But none came. One afternoon she unplugged it. She couldn't bear the sight of it waiting to speak. It reminded her too much of herself, a vessel once full of sound, now carrying only memory. That night, the quiet pressed hard against her heart. She sat by the table and whispered, "Lord, even the noise has left me." Her words drifted into the still air. And though the radio remained silent, something unseen began to stir, as if heaven had heard what the old machine could not. Dinner time came with its usual ritual, slow, quiet, and lonely. Eleanor moved through the kitchen by memory more than by need. The old stove creaked as it warmed, the kettle sighed softly, and she prepared her single plate with the precision of habit. Cooking had once been an act of love. Now it was a way of keeping the silence from swallowing her whole. She set one plate on the table, one fork, one cup of tea. Out of instinct, she reached for a second, and then stopped. Her hand hovered in the air for a moment, the gesture breaking her heart in a way she thought it couldn't break anymore. She sat down and bowed her head. Her prayer was short, a whisper more than words. "Thank you, Lord, for what I still have." But her voice trembled as she spoke, because what she still had was mostly memory. As she ate, she found herself speaking quietly into the room, pretending someone was listening. It made the food go down easier. She talked about the weather, the flowers outside, the way the evening light fell against the wall. Small talk with ghosts. When she finished, she left the other chair pulled out, as if someone might still come and sit there, and though she knew no one would, she couldn't bring herself to push it back in. It was her way of keeping hope alive, not loud, not desperate, just there, like a seat waiting for a promise. Sunday mornings used to be her favorite. They had meant hymns, handshakes, and the warmth of voices rising together in faith. Now they were just another kind of silence. Still, Eleanor dressed as she always had, her best coat, her small hat, her Bible pressed gently against her chest. She didn't know why she kept doing it. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was habit. The little church was only 3 streets away. She could see its steeple from her porch, white against the grey sky. But each time she reached for the gate, something in her stopped. Her knees ached, yes, but it wasn't her body that kept her still. It was her heart. She didn't want to walk in and feel the empty space where her husband used to sit. So instead, she just stood there, the cold wind brushing her cheeks, the faint sound of the church bell drifting down the street. The sound should have comforted her, but it didn't. It only reminded her of everything that had gone quiet inside. When the bell stopped ringing, she turned and walked back to the porch. The walk that once led her to worship now led her home again. Back to her chair, her tea, her solitude. She sat down, closed her eyes, and whispered what she hadn't been able to say out loud at the church. "Lord, I miss you." The wind rustled softly through the trees, and for the briefest moment, the sound felt like a reply. The night came quietly, with a thin rain tapping against the windows. Eleanor sat by her lamp, the Bible open on her lap. She hadn't been able to read much lately. Her eyes tired easily, and her mind wandered to places the verses couldn't reach. But tonight, she kept turning the same page, as if the answer she needed might appear between the lines. Outside, thunder rolled far away, and the lights flickered once before steadying again. For a long time, she listened to the rain, its rhythm, like the heartbeat of the world she no longer felt part of. And somewhere between one breath and the next, something inside her finally broke. The tears came slowly at first, silent, hesitant, like strangers at her door. Then they came freely, years of quiet grief rising to the surface all at once. She pressed her face into her hands and wept, not for the pain, but for how long she had carried it alone. Her voice trembled through the sobs. "Oh, Jesus! I thought I was finished crying." The words fell into the room and dissolved into the soft light. No one answered, but she felt something shift, like the air itself had turned its face toward her. And though the tears kept coming, they no longer felt like weakness. They felt like release, as if heaven had finally reached down and opened the floodgates of her heart. When the tears finally stopped, Eleanor sat in the stillness, her face damp, her hands trembling in her lap. She wanted to pray, to find the words she'd been taught long ago, but her heart felt too full for speech. Every sentence she tried to form dissolved before reaching her lips. So she simply closed her eyes and breathed. The house was silent again, but it wasn't empty. Something in that silence felt different now, gentler, listening. It was as if the air had drawn close to her, not to speak, but to understand. Her lips moved, though no sound came out. It was prayer in its purest form, not language, but surrender. Every sigh, every heartbeat was a conversation she didn't need to translate. She sat there for a long time, feeling the weight of her loneliness slowly lift. Her body still hurt, her memories still ached, but beneath it all there was peace. Small, quiet, undeniable. For the first time in years, Eleanor didn't ask for anything. She didn't try to reach heaven. She simply allowed heaven to reach her. And in that wordless prayer, the distance between them disappeared. The clock had stopped ticking sometime in the night. Eleanor didn't notice at first. The silence felt deeper than usual, not empty, but alive. She sat in her chair, eyes closed, her breath slow, steady. Then it happened, soft, almost like a breeze brushing through her thoughts. A whisper. It wasn't a voice she heard with her ears, but one that echoed deep inside her chest. It spoke only one word, her name. Eleanor! Her eyes opened. For a moment she couldn't move. The sound was so familiar, so tender that her heart trembled beneath it. It was a voice she had always known, the same one that had comforted her in childhood prayers, the same one she had begged to hear again for years. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they didn't burn. They felt holy. She didn't ask who it was. She already knew. Jesus, she breathed, her voice breaking on the name. It hung in the air like a confession, like worship, like coming home. The whisper didn't speak again, but the silence that followed was full, as if heaven itself had entered the room just to call her by name. After the whisper faded, the house seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor sat motionless, her hands pressed to her chest, feeling the echo of her name linger like a soft vibration in the air. She waited, half expecting another sound, but there was only silence. And yet, it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt alive. It wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and steady, as if it were listening, not to her words, but to her being. For the first time in her long years of loneliness, she didn't feel the need to speak. There was nothing to explain, nothing to prove. The silence already knew her story, every grief, every memory, every hidden ache. She sat back slowly, her breathing deep and calm. The clock on the wall still hadn't resumed, but she no longer needed it to mark the moment. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. Somewhere inside that quiet, Eleanor understood something she never had before, that God had not been absent during the silence. He had been inside it, waiting for her to notice, and now that she had, the silence no longer frightened her. It had become a conversation, one where every pause was love. The old chair by the window had always been empty. It was her husband's chair, worn at the arms, its cushion faded by years of sunlight and quiet waiting. Every day she looked at it, every night she avoided it, because the emptiness hurt too much. But now, something had changed. The air around it felt different, softened, almost warm, as if someone had just sat down. Eleanor blinked, her heart fluttering in her chest. The chair hadn't moved, but she knew. She didn't see anyone, but she could feel him there, the same presence that had called her name, the same peace that had filled the silence. It was so real that she didn't dare look away, afraid that even blinking might break the moment. Her lips trembled. Jesus, is that you? The words left her in a whisper, and the air itself seemed to answer, not with sound, but with calm that reached deeper than any word could go. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned her face toward the chair. It no longer looked empty. In its quiet shape, she could almost see him sitting there, not as a vision, but as love made visible. And for the first time in years, Eleanor didn't speak into the silence. She simply sat with him, For a long while neither of them moved. The room was still, yet filled, as if the air itself had become holy. Eleanor's breathing slowed, her frail body easing into the calm that surrounded her. Then, gently, something touched her shoulder. It wasn't a gust of air, and it wasn't her imagination. It was warmth, real, deliberate, alive. A hand she could not see, but one her soul recognized instantly. She didn't flinch, she didn't question, she simply closed her eyes and let the moment hold her. All the years of loneliness, the empty meals, the unanswered prayers, seemed to gather in that one point of contact, and in a single heartbeat they melted away. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they carried no pain this time, only relief. Her lips moved without sound, as though her heart itself was praying, "Thank you for remembering me." The touch remained for a while, steady, kind, eternal. It said everything words never could, that she had never truly been alone, not for a single breath. When it lifted, the warmth stayed, not just on her skin, but deep within her, where faith had once gone quiet. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her heart resting in the peace that filled the room. The warmth on her shoulder faded slowly, but what it left behind was even stronger. A sense that love itself was watching her, close enough to touch, closer than breath. Then in the quiet, the voice came again, not loud, not from the air. It rose from somewhere deeper, from the very center of her being. "Eleanor," it said, soft as light falling through a window. And then, with a tenderness that broke her completely, "You are mine." Her hands flew to her face, and she began to weep, not the lonely tears she'd known for so long, but tears that felt like they were washing her soul clean. Every word of that short sentence sank into her heart, like truth rediscovered. You are mine, not forgotten, not discarded, not too old, too sick, or too late, beloved. Claimed, held, her whole body trembled with relief. She had spent years waiting for a knock at the door, a call, a visit, a sign, and yet the one she'd been waiting for had been waiting inside the silence all along. Through the tears, she whispered, "I was yours all along, wasn't I?" And though no answer came in sound, the stillness itself seemed to smile. The room began to change, not in shape, but in spirit. It was as though the air itself was glowing, a gentle radiance rising from nowhere, soft enough to see, strong enough to feel. Eleanor blinked, unsure if her tired eyes were playing tricks, but the light didn't fade. It deepened. It wasn't sunlight. It wasn't from the lamp either. It was something living, a light that moved like breath, that wrapped around her like love made visible. Every corner of the room, the chair, the photographs, the old clock, seemed to belong to it, bathed in a glow that whispered peace. Eleanor's heart steadied. The light didn't blind her. It invited her. It warmed her skin, settled her fears, and touched even the parts of her that had long been numb. Every sorrow that had ever lived inside her rose and dissolved into that brightness, as though it could not survive in love so pure. She looked toward the window, and for a moment it felt like heaven was spilling gently into her little home, not in thunder, not in vision, but in tenderness. Her lips trembled and she whispered through tears, "Is this you, Lord?" And the light, silent but alive, seemed to pulse once, as if to say, "It always has been." For a moment, Eleanor simply sat in the light, her hands resting in her lap, her breath calm and deep. Then something began to change, something inside her, something she couldn't name. It started in her chest, a slow, steady rising, like a burden being unhooked from her heart, one chain at a time. She hadn't realized how heavy she had become, not her body, but her spirit. All the years of grief, the loneliness that had wrapped itself around her like a second skin, began to loosen. The pain in her back eased, her shoulders straightened. Even the ache behind her eyes, the ache of remembering too much, faded into something softer. It was as though the light itself was lifting her from the inside, reminding her that she was more than the sorrow she carried. Eleanor closed her eyes and let it happen. She didn't resist. She didn't cling. She simply allowed it to rise. Every memory, every tear, every silent prayer she had ever buried. They all floated upward, weightless, shimmering, free. When she opened her eyes again, the light was still there, but she was lighter too. And with a trembling smile, she whispered, "I don't hurt anymore." The room didn't answer. It didn't need to. The absence of pain was its own reply. The next morning arrived gentle and slow. Eleanor woke to sunlight spilling through the curtains, the kind of light that made dust particles look like small miracles in the air. Her body still felt frail, but her spirit felt new, as though something deep within her had been washed clean. She rose carefully, made her tea, and sat by the window as she always did. But instead of silence, a melody rose uninvited to her lips, a hymn she hadn't sung in years. Her voice was soft, cracked and breathy, but it was hers. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. She stopped, startled by the sound of her own singing. It had been so long since her house had heard music, so long since her heart had felt strong enough to praise. The words trembled out again, this time steadier, carried not by her strength, but by gratitude. The tune filled the small kitchen like a prayer taking shape in the air. The light on the table seemed to glow warmer. The chair across from her no longer looked so empty. She didn't sing to remember anyone. She sang because she knew he was there, listening. When the song ended, Eleanor wiped her eyes and smiled faintly. "I guess I still remember the words," she said. And somewhere deep in her soul, she heard a whisper, "You never forgot them. You just forgot to sing." That afternoon, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't the old kind of quiet. Now it felt peaceful, like a song that had ended, but still lingered in the heart. Eleanor sat near the window, watching the soft sway of trees outside, when a sound broke the stillness. A knock. Light, hesitant but real. She froze. It had been months since anyone had come to her door. For a second she wondered if she had imagined it. Then it came again, 2 gentle taps, followed by a voice. "Mrs. Lewis, it's Anna from next door. Are you all right?" Eleanor's throat tightened. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Yes, dear, come in." The door creaked open, and a young woman stepped inside, holding a small basket. "I was baking and thought of you," Anna said shyly. "I don't know why, but I just felt like I should come." Eleanor smiled softly, her eyes glistening. She didn't try to explain. She only gestured toward the table where 2 cups sat, as if she had been waiting. As they sat together, Eleanor realized something beautiful. When Jesus enters a life, he doesn't always leave by the same door. Sometimes he comes back through the kindness of a stranger. And when Anna laughed, Eleanor found herself laughing too. A sound so warm, it felt like heaven echoing in her little home. They sat together for a long time, the young neighbor speaking softly, the old woman listening like one who had been waiting for company her whole life. At first, they talked about small things, the weather, the garden, the smell of fresh bread still warm from the basket. But then, without planning to, Eleanor began to tell her story. Her words came slowly, carefully, like treasures being lifted out of an old box. She spoke of the years she had loved, the husband she had buried, the son she had lost too soon. Her voice trembled, but it didn't break. Every sorrow she mentioned felt lighter the moment she spoke it aloud. Then she told Anna about that night, the whisper, the light, the presence. She didn't try to make it sound grand or mysterious. She told it simply, like a truth she had finally found the courage to share. "I thought I was alone," she said, her eyes glistening, "but he was here the whole time. He called my name." Anna listened without speaking. There was a softness in her eyes, something between wonder and tears. When Eleanor finished, neither of them said a word for a while. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full, like the holy quiet after a prayer is answered. Eleanor reached across the table, placing her frail hand over Anna's. "Don't wait until you're old to hear him," she said gently. "He's calling now, for all of us." And as their hands stayed together, the small house felt alive again, filled not with memory, but with the sound of faith being passed from one heart to another. The days that came after felt softer, as if time itself had slowed its pace to match her calm. Eleanor woke each morning with no rush, no ache of dread. Her body still tired easily, but her heart was at rest. She no longer feared the quiet hours. They had become sacred now, a space she shared with someone unseen but always near. She still sat by the window each day, still sipped her tea, still hummed the same hymn under her breath, but everything carried a new lightness. She had stopped asking for signs, stopped wondering why so much had been taken. Now she simply whispered, "Thank you for staying." The neighbor came often, sometimes with flowers, sometimes just to talk. And each time Eleanor smiled in that gentle way that made people feel like they had stepped into something holy. Her loneliness hadn't vanished. It had been transformed. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was a place where grace had taken root. Some evenings, when the world outside grew quiet, she would feel that familiar warmth again, not as bright as that first night, but steady, constant, like a promise fulfilled. She would close her eyes and whisper, "I know you're here." And she always was right. Peace wasn't a visitor anymore. It had moved in. It happened on a quiet evening, the kind that felt outside of time. The air was still, the light from the window pale and golden, settling over Eleanor's chair like a final blessing. She had been reading her Bible, the same worn pages she had touched every day, when her eyes grew heavy, her breathing slowed. She set the book gently on her lap and looked toward the empty chair by the window. Only it didn't look empty anymore. The same peace that had filled her home so many times before was there again, stronger now, closer. She smiled faintly. Her lips moved in a whisper only heaven could hear. "I hear you, Lord." And then she did. The same voice that had once broken her silence, the same whisper that had spoken her name in the dark, came again, soft, loving, unmistakable. "Eleanor, come home." She exhaled one final time, not in struggle, but in release, like someone stepping across a threshold into a light they've known all along. The room stayed warm after she was gone. The clock began ticking again. And in the quiet that followed, there was no grief, only presence, because when Jesus calls his own, the call never ends. It only leads home.